Following public outcry, federal government have withdrawn the circular ordering visits to reopen the universities. Good morning and welcome to the dailies on ECWA TV, and also thank you so much for keeping the date with us. I'm Sada Elisha Dasham, and Rachel is here with me. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, Sada.
I was about to be tempted to say national talk, Well, let's take a look at the various papers. We're live on Facebook and also on YouTube, so you can drop your comment and be actively involved with the conversation we're having this morning. Let's start with the first paper, Rachel.
On the Nigerian Tribune, Atiku appoints Saraki Anyin Shekaro Ayilola Sokondus as special advisors. Atiku Okowa Towa over above other candidates. This is coming from the campaign spokesman, and you can read more of that on page 23. On the campaign list, APC Council pleads with government over nominees. Confirm Chimaroke Inamani, PDP Senator, as members. More of that news on page 22. Our support for Obi aligns with Efeni Ferre's ideological, equitable principles. This is coming from Adebanjo, and you can read more of that on page 22. And the big story on the Nigerian Tribune: following public outcry, federal government withdraws circular ordering vice chancellors to reopen varsities. Sultan Sanwo-Olu urged ASU to end 7-month-old strike. You can read that big story on page 8. And on the right side of the paper, heavy security presence at Osun Election Tribunal sitting. Hearing adjourned till October 4th. More of that story on page 23. And this is from Ekiti. Appeal Court reserves judgment to suit challenging Ayebanji's nomination. You can read more of that story on page 23. Male student in Bauchi protests separation from female counterparts. You can see that story on page 28. And that's all the story on Nigerian Tribune.
All right, let's take a look at the New Telegraph newspaper. Federal government domestic debt stock rises 18.8% to 3.32 trillion naira in 1 year. And this is coming from Ukraine. We have Nigeria eases EU gas crisis with 447 billion naira export detail found on page 5. And we have Nigeria in darkness again as the national grid collapsed the 6th time in 2022. And I would like to read a little bit on that. We have blackout has been experienced in some parts of the country as the national grid has collapsed again. Announcing the development on Monday, the Ikeja Electricity Distribution Company, in a statement via its verified Twitter handle, said, "This is to inform you that the outrage you're currently experiencing is due to the system collapse of the national grid, which occurred earlier, that's yesterday at 10:50 hours. This has affected the transmission station within our network and resulted in the loss of power supply to our customers. Kindly bear with us as we await the restoration of the grid." The Enugu Electricity Distribution Company PLC also announced system collapse, adding that the current blackout has been currently experienced has affected the entire southeast. The announcement contained in the statement by the power distribution company issued in Enugu on Monday was signed by its head corporate communication, Mr. Emeka Eze. Eze disclosed that the system collapsed at 10:51 a.m. on Monday, September 26, 2022. He said this has resulted in the loss of supply currently being experienced across the network. Due to this development, all our interface TCN stations are out of supply, and we are unable to provide service to our customers in Abia, Anambra, Ebonyi, Enugu, and Imo states. We are on standby awaiting detailed information of the collapse and restoration of the supply from the National Control Center. So for those who have been affected in those areas, you please bear with the TCN as they look towards what they can do about that. Still on New Telegraph newspaper, we have Afeni Ferry endorsed Peter Obi, and you can read more of that on page 4. Catholic Council, Nigerians should vote candidate with best manifesto's economic blueprint. And on the new legal year in tears, Lagos CJ begs for reconstruction of Bond High Court. The big story on New Telegraph says 2023 campaign. Atiku hits Wike, appoints Secondo's advisor. Saraki, Ayim, Shakaro, Oyolola also make the list. He understands Nigerian best, says, I have no hand in IU's trial. This is coming from Governor Autumn of Benue State. And we have PCC pacify the PGF others over nomination to begin campaign with prayers and work. I use poor integrity, a plus for APC. This is coming from Inkere. And all this can be found on page 2, 3, and 8. And on insecurity, terrorists threaten to kill new baby and murder 2 sisters over 50 million naira ransom. We have sold all that we have. This is coming from the family. And we have dislodged terrorist bandits to fight food shortage, high prices. This is coming from the NIAE telling the federal government. I hope something will be done about that. This story has been on our papers for quite a number of, weeks right now, looking at the fact that we have a mother with a newborn baby and we're having with sisters. And these terrorists are demanding for some amount of money before these ones will be released. And we see family members already lamenting that they have sold all that they have just so that they'll be able to pay for this ransom. And they cannot meet up with the demand of the terrorists. And I hope that the state government, the federal government will really look into this. Even though the federal government, precisely the president have said that he's giving the army till December to be able to end all this. And I just hope that all this will be ended very, very soon, because it really is a sad one. You cannot think about the trauma they are going through in the death of these bandits. And I hope something will be done about that. Still on New Telegram newspaper. And we have from 2023 polls, INEC ban religious and ethnic campaigns, read riot act parties and candidates. And we have OPS express mixed feelings over impact on economy, say process will slow the growth. Detail of this can be found on page 2 and 3. And on ASU strike, NUC withdraws circular directing VCs to reopen schools, barely 24 hours after insurance. ASU has insisted no force under earth could take it back to classrooms. And I hope we really need to look into this. If ASU are saying nobody can force them, then you can imagine what this looks, because it looks like this is a war between ASU and the federal government. And we don't want it to get to that point, because the students are the one affected. From the look of things, I don't know when these classrooms will be open. Elections, campaign is starting tomorrow. Elections will start rolling in. And if we don't take care, maybe they'll say till the end of 2023 election. And this is really a sad one. We just don't want it to get to that point. So I hope we'll look into this. Downside, we have a study on page 26. So you can do well to get a New Telegraph and read more about the study and also any of the stories that is of interest to you.
On the Daily Sun, Atiku storms Enugu as Southeast receive Okowa as Igbo son today. More of that story on page 6. Osun Election Tribunal grants INEC, Adeleke, PDP, 7 others to file response. You can read that on page 3. And still on the 2023 election, APC presidential campaign crisis widens. And the story on that, and the writer on that story, some government NWC complain may stay away from inauguration tomorrow. List not conclusive. Campaign director. No plan to sack Keyamo as spokesman. This is coming from the presidency, and you can read all of that on page 6. And on the right side of the paper, blackout as national grid collapses again. You can read that on page 2. Bandits threaten to kill newborn mother, sister, if 50 million naira ransom is not paid in 48 hours. You can read the details on page 4. Again, Obi gets Pan-Yoruba group's endorsement. A Fairer describes APC PDP candidate as spent forces. You can read more of what he has to say on page 29. INEC to deploy cumbersome measures to determine winners. Call for issue-based campaign. You can read all INEC has to say on page 29. Saraki, Anyim, Shekaro, Secondus, and others name Atiku campaigns advisor. You can read that on page 6. Nnamdi Kanu's release crucial to peace in Southeast. This is coming from APC chief. You can read more of that on page 28. ASU, federal government makes U-turn on resumption order, withdraws memo asking vice chancellors to reopen universities, and more of that on page 28. And on the downside of the paper, NASENI unfolds Buhari's plan to reverse reliance on foreign artisans. More of that report on page 27. And that's all the news on Daily Sun.
And on leadership newspaper, we have Meloni emerges Italy's first female prime minister. That's an international story that you can find on page 13. Bandit kill 3, kidnap 22, threatening to kill siblings and newborn. National grid begins recovery after the 7th collapse in 9 months. And on ASU strike, in dramatic volte-face, federal government withdraws order on university reopening. The big story here say another transition begins tomorrow as INEC leave ban on campaigns. The rider following the story, electoral body, MPC declares hate speech, abusive slogan, no-go areas. APC launches electronic with prayers, peace walk Wednesday. Atiku named Saraki, Ayim Oyolola Secondos special envoys, special and technical advisors. Tinubu, Shetima, Wike, Autumn and others in London. Kichiku asks Nigerians to reject bigger parties. Obi visit Obasanjo, IBB Abdulsalami, Emir of Kanu. All of that can be found on page 4. On 2023, guard your utterances, Sultan Khan warned religious leaders. We are Amoteku Akeredolu vows, and really, this has been going on since last week when he said if Katsina can actually arm their state policing, he also feels he can also arm their Amotekus because they really need the arms to protect. So we're still looking at that, and this is what he's actually vowing. So we just hope that at the end of the day that they will be psychological and also physically stable to be able to carry arms around. Still on the leadership newspaper, we can't replace Shekaru's name as NMPP senatorial candidate. This is coming from INEC. And we have the picture story here where we can see President Muhammadu Buhari on his arrival from New York and also from the meeting he had at the United Nations General Assembly yesterday. And that's all on the leadership newspaper.
On the Al Jazeera newspaper, still on the 2023 presidency, we can't continue to marginalize Indigo, says Afenifere. You can read more of that on page 9. And the big story is still on ASU strike. Federal government withdraws order to reopen universities, and you can read that on page 8. And on the left side of the paper, experts react over deficit rise by 128%. More of that report on page 26. HYPPADEC Mills bill to prohibit building on flood risk area. You can read that report on page 15. Amid crisis, APC postpones inauguration of presidential campaign council. You can read that story on page 30. And on the right side of the paper, Nigeria's economic outlook uncertain. This is coming from the World Bank, and you can read what they have to say on page 27. Still on insecurity, look for legitimate means of defense, Khan urges Nigeria. And still on the 2023 campaign, Atiku appoints Saraki special envoy, Ayim and Sekaro and others as advisors. You can read that on page 30. Still on the Al Jazeera newspaper, nationwide blackout as grid collapses to 0 megawatts. And there's a picture story of our president coming back from his trip to New York. And that's all the news on Al Jazeera.
Daily Trust newspaper, federal government backtracks, withdraws order to reopen universities. INEC warned parties candidate against hate speech. Bandit kill police inspector, 3 others abduct dozens in Kaduna and Katsina. Big story, disquiet in APC over composition of campaign team. Osibanjo Amechi silent, raises dust. Tinubu begins campaign with prayer session. Council fails to issue letters to nominees. We are open to working with all. This is coming from a spokesman, which you can read on page 4. Picture story here, we can see flood cut off Lokoja Highway, submerges houses and worship centers. And this flood has actually done lots of danger. Well, we hope we'll actually adhere to the instruction, just like we saw in the former paper where we see there have been a prohibition on building on flood risk areas. So I hope that we'll actually adhere to all this to avoid all destroy of life and properties at the end of the day. Still on Daily Trust newspaper, oil price dips to $85 per barrel. On paid allowances, ex-servicemen take protest to defense headquarters. I think they really need to do something about that. This is not just about our ex-servicemen. We're having retirees, the police, and even civil servants that have been going on protest because their allowances have not been paid, their pensions have not been paid. So we hope the right authorities and agencies will actually take all of this into cognizance and pay the ex-servicemen and also all the retirees their allowances and gratuity at the end of the day. The last story in the Daily Trust newspaper, man visits Lagos police station to bail friend and steals the policeman's phone. Well, this is really a very ridiculous one, that's right. Well, that's all on the Daily Trust newspaper.
On this day newspaper, Adebanjo, why Afenifere is supporting Peter Obi's presidential bid. You can read more of that on page 10. Still on the 2023 election, this is coming from INEC. In 2023, clear winners must score highest votes in poll, 1/3 of votes in 2/3 of 36 states. You can read how INEC plans on doing this on page 27. Nigeria's troubled power grid collapses again, begins recovery. You can read that on page 26. Akeredolu Amateku must be given arms to carry out his duty. And the writer on that story says, seeks support to fight marauders committing crime against humanity. You can continue reading that on page 10. And the big story, Autumn breaks with Wike, says he's not supporting Ayu's removal. And the story on that writer reaffirms confidence in his ability to lead party to victory. PDP stakeholders pressure Atiku to prevail on chairman to quit. Dino Malayi, we're not threatened by our competitors. Ex-VP appoints Saraki, Anyin Shekaro, Secondus and others as special advisors. And you can still see a picture story of Buhari meeting ex-ON mobile president in New York. And that's all the story and news on this day.
Let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper then. Market prices at higher risks ahead of the MPR decision. No going back on PVA's e-transmission of result, INEC insists. And from the Kaduna, terrorists threaten to kill housewife, baby and others in 48 hours. Ex-lawmaker kick against state anniversaries hails Emmanuel's feat, which you can read on page 9. Big story here says INEC unveiled ground rules for hitch-free issues-based campaigns. The writer warns governors against denying opposition party access to public facilities. NBC Parley broadcast station urges equal access for parties and candidates. Afenifere Igbos brutally marginalized. It is their turn for presidency. You're speaking for yourself, not Yoruba group tackles Afenifere over endorsement of Peter Obi. An inauguration of the APC campaign cancelled on hold over inconclusion of governor's list. Presidency declares votes of confidence on Keyamo. Atiku appoints Secondus, Saraki, Ayem and others as special campaign advisors. Downside of the paper, federal government makes U-turn, withdraws order to reopen varsities. And we have org of killings, abduction in Plateau and Kaduna. Downside of the paper, we have death of quality teachers, impediment of functional education. This is coming from Afe Babolola, and he is sending a warning, which you can read on page 5 of the Guardian newspaper. And that's all on the Guardian.
On the Punch newspaper, Mobile transactions hit 11 trillion naira in 8 months. You can read that report on page 26. Federal government reverses facilities reopening order, ASU adamant. Remove petrol subsidy, implement PIA, LCCI tells federal government. You can read all of that on page 22. Group demands sanctions as power collapses 7th time. You can read all of that on page 21. Atiku names Saraki, Ayim and others as special advisors. You can read that on page 16. And the big story still on campaign and 2023 election. INEC, Khan and Sultan warn parties supporters against violence. And the writer for that story, commission to publish voter registration January 2023. SGS sues for peace. Avoid utterances, actions capable of causing violence. This is coming from Sanwo-Olu and Yakubu. Afenifere justifies Obi's endorsement. Tinubu's fume tackles Adebanjo. And there's a picture story of the Amatekun. Keredulo insists on arms. Afenifere knocks federal government. You can read more of that story on page 16. And on the downside of the paper, Ogun communities lament 100 years darkness, electricity project rots. You can read more of that stories on pages 4 and 5. 6 sexagenarians, his own family, die in Lagos apartment. You can read more of that story on page 15. ICPC sets up committee to manage forfeited assets, and you can read all of that on page 14. And that's all the news on the Punch.
On the Daily Times, we have strike confusion as federal government orders VCs to reopen varsities and make new turn. On 2023, avoid abusive, scandalous languages during campaign. INEC warned parties and candidates, which you can find on page 2 of the Daily Times newspaper. Nigeria's economic outlook uncertain, says the World Bank. Federal government begins implementation of new retirement age for teachers. Well, it's one thing to actually implement the new retirement age, but it's another thing for them to actually get what they rightly, deserve at the end of the day. You can't expect a teacher to keep teaching till age 60. We're still having issues of our lecturers that are not being paid their allowances. They're having issues of implementations of, some agreement they had since 2009 and all of that. So it's not just about looking at the new retirement age, but then we also have to look deeper into it. Are we giving them what they deserve? If World Bank is already having an uncertainty about our economic look, we have the issue of food crisis. We have the issue of people are very poor in Nigeria. About 20 million or so are living below $1 per day. So you know what that really means at the look of things. Look at the flood I've done away with cattle, with properties, food and all of that. So you know that definitely there's really an uncertainty, and campaign is starting tomorrow, which we're already scared. We saw yesterday the demand for bulletproof cars. We're having issues of insecurity still. So lots of things are actually going to affect the economic look of Nigeria. We are running on deficit. Our debt is about 42 point something trillion naira. So you know what that means for our economy presently. So we hope that we'll look into that and readdress our steps where we've gotten it wrong.
And if you remember in the previous paper, there was a place where Afe Babalola warned against the quality of teachers. To be honest, I feel this is not what the government should be looking at right now. I'm not saying it's not important, but can we focus on the welfare of these teachers first? Let's be sure that the system is catering for these people. Before you even start thinking of their age, retirement and all of that, they are in the service right now and they're not doing okay. They're not getting their needs paid. Some months are being skipped. And just as we said, they even retire and they're not seeing this pension. They have to keep protesting for what is theirs. We can see ASU is on strike and we know these are the lecturers make up ASU. So can the government please just focus on what is more important right now? I'm not saying that the age is not important, but can you focus on the welfare of these teachers that you're having at the moment Are their needs being met? Then before you can move to other things.
Of course, I totally agree with you, Rachel. Well, let's look at other stories still on the Daily Times. On 2023 presidency, why Afenifere picked Obi. This is coming from Adebanjo. And the writer says to keep Nigeria one, everybody should be Obi Dati complaint. Well, you can read all of that from the Daily Times newspaper. Ozibanjo seeks sustain momentum built on the MSMES, which you can read on page 3. JAM set new guidelines for UTME and others operations. Picture story here, we can see the National Nigeria Inter-Religious Council, where we have different religious leaders in, and I hope that this meeting will actually foster peace, unity, and also will come together for the better of Nigeria at the end of the day, regardless of what religion you belong to at the end of the day. And that's all on the Daily Times newspaper.
On the Nation newspaper, Tinubu Shetima joint ticket best for women. You can read that on page 5. Atiku bypasses Wike. Allies name Saraki and Yulola as advisors. You can read more of that on page 26. 2,119 miners owing federal government 2.7 billion naira, says RMAFC. Bandits kill 3. Kidnap 22 in Kaduna communities. More of that story in page 6. 500,000 Nigerians await repatriation from Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. More of that report on page 29. And the big story on the Nation, Akeredolu, no going back on plan to arm Amoteku Corps. And the writer for that story, weapons procurement will be backed by law. Outfit needs tool to carry out its rules, and you can continue reading that on page 4. Don't plunge Nigeria into crisis. Can Sultan warn religious leaders? Sanwo-Olu others preach peace. Federal government reverses order urging vice chancellors to reopen universities, and you can read more of that story on page 28. And on the downside of the paper, Osun Tribunal adjourns sitting to October 4th, and Bayelsa kidnapped suspect paraded. You can read more of that story on page 6, and that was all the news on the Nation.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think we're ripe for a break right at this moment. So we'd like to take a break where we can open the phone lines for our callers. So you can call us, let us hear what are your views? What do you feel about all of this? The national grid collapse and then the withdrawal from the, the federal government for visits to open universities and other concerning the campaign starting tomorrow. What do you feel should be the way forward? We would really love to hear from you when our phone lines are open after this break. Please do not go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back, still the Dailies, and I'm Sarah Elisha, and Rachel is here with me, and we've been looking at various stories that have been trending on our papers, and our phone numbers are displayed on your screen right at this moment, so we really love to hear you. Let us hear what your views are, and you can also drop that on our official Facebook and YouTube pages, and we'll read it real time. Let's go to the Business Day newspaper. How APC-PDP Labour Party planned campaign kicks off Wednesday as INEC warned against hate speech, which you can read on page 34. Nigerian power producers face biggest payment shortfall. FMCG firm prioritized local sources as a global crisis raises import costs. The big story, Naira under pressure as the MPC decide on rates today. Tech talent shortage threatens financial inclusion innovation. Naira's gap with official rate widens to most since 2016, which you can read on page 3. That's all on the Business Day newspaper.
On the Daily Independent, still on insecurity, grant states equal access to sophisticated arms, Akeredolu tells federal government. Revenue underperformance keep domestic debt high as MPC considers fresh rate high. You can read more of that story on page 29. And the big story on the Daily Independent, confusion as federal government retracts order asking vice chancellors to reopen universities. You can continue reading that on page 29. We started implementing 65 years retirement age for teachers. This is coming from the federal government, and you can read that on page 7. On the left side of the paper, INEC warns party against hate speed ahead, lifting ban on campaigns. You can read more of that on page 29. Livestock sector capable of generating 33 trillion naira annually. This is coming from the federal government. You don't have monopoly of violence, Labour Party warns APC. Atiku names Secondus Saraki, Anyim Shekaru and others as special advisors. And the writer says, Otom denies plotting Ayu's sack. You can read that on page 6. TCN restores national grid after partial system disturbance. More of that story on page 29. And still on the Daily Independent, disquiet in PDP over Atiku's choice of campaign spokesperson. You can continue reading that on page 6. And on the downside of the paper, illegal oil lifting allegation. Nikonde exposes blackmailers at work, and you can read that story on page 6. And that's all the news on Daily Independent.
On Blueprint newspaper, 24 hours to campaign kick-off, INEC warn against abusive, interment, scandalous language. The writer says urges political parties to observe guidelines on rallies and processions. Says we are at the critical stage of preparations. We never ignore names submitted by governors. This is coming from the APC Campaign Council. And Atiku appoints Saraki, Ayim Shakaru, and other special advisors. And on strike confusion as federal government direct visits to reopen varsities and withdraws their order. Blackout looms as national grid collapses 7th in 1 year. And from Kaduna, we have bandit threatening to kill infants, mothers, sisters over 50 million naira ransom. And on forest scarcity, naira crashes to all-time record low of 730 naira per dollar. And naira keeps falling every day and depreciating. And I won't be surprised if this campaign will actually make it more. So I just hope that with all the guidelines that INEC have actually placed, that they will make sure that the law enforcement will actually follow up and be sure that all of these rules are being followed, looking at all the speech, hate speech left, right and center, which you have warned about. And I just hope that all of this will be followed, because it's really sad when we have our own naira depreciating. We're still looking at the oil theft. We're still looking at, we are importing, we are consuming more than we are even producing. So you could see that all of these have actually resulted to the forest scarcity. We trade more in dollar than we do in naira.
Yeah.
So I hope that we'll look inward and see what can we do to make sure that we strengthen our own naira. And at a point in time, let's be able to use our naira to use it outside Nigeria, not just within the country. So we'll look forward to a day where our naira will be strong again.
And I would like to say, Sally, I don't know, do you think the government is doing something about this? Because our currency only keeps devaluing compared to the dollar. Like, it's been 80 years now, and it has just been devaluing and devaluing. And I wonder, are they doing something about it? Because if I'm left on my own, I'll say they're not doing anything about it. But if they are, let us know what they're doing about it, because we've not had a time where the dollar has been in the same place for like a year. Maybe I'm even going too far. Has the dollar compared to the naira been like, okay, let's say 500 for over 6 months or a year? I don't think we've witnessed that. It has just been devaluing over time. So it makes me wonder, is the government doing anything about this? I hope they are, but if they are, we're not seeing it. So it means they're not doing the right thing, or they're doing nothing at all. It's about time they start that. We are tired. It's today is 730. You wake up tomorrow is 740. By the end of this month, it might be 750, and it's a fact because that has just been what has been happening. We didn't start this year with the dollar at 730. So it keeps increasing, and that just shows us that nothing is really being done concerning it, because if something was done, at least there will be a pause for a while and say, okay, you know what, since we entered the year 2022, the dollar has been at 600 and it hasn't changed or haven't devalued, naira hasn't devalued. But that's not the case when it comes to this.
Well, just like you said, Rachel, it's a question that we all need answers. What are the government doing about this? And just like I said, we know what to do.
Exactly.
And we've already said, if we're going to look at the oil theft, we need to control that. Talking about also looking at the paying of fuel subsidy, we can actually fix our own refineries, where while we produce our own oil, we redefine it by ourselves, and then we consume it here. And then that is when we have people from outside the shores of Nigeria coming in, then that will actually strengthen our naira to some extent. And then possibly maybe we have to also look at the companies within. It will surprise you to know that there are even schools that are in Nigeria that you have to pay your child's school fees in dollar. Why can't you pay in naira? Are we trying to say that our own currency is not good enough? So I think when the federal government move into putting such laws in order, then that will also help to strengthen our naira. So just like I said, I look forward to, just like you said, where the naira is even, we'll have where it's 100 naira to $1.
Exactly.
I mean, that will be the joy. We'll begin to ask leaders in the past, how were you able to maintain the, the currency for quite a number of time, that dollar and naira was equivalent to some extent. So we look forward to that. Well, let's look at other stories still on the blueprint. We have the RMRDC developing Moringa Olerifa value chain to boost economy. Good use of revenue will enhance tech, and I take that story again. Good use of revenue will enhance tax moral compliances. This is coming from the First Inland Revenue Service. Nuclear weapon threat. U.S. warned Putin of catastrophic consequences. I will procure arms for Amoteko. This is coming from Akeredolu. And embassies in Nigeria brought artisans to fix water closet. This is coming from Nasina, which you can read on page 5. We have a picture story here where we can see the chairman of INEC and other stakeholders. So you can do well to grab the Blueprint newspaper and read any of the stories that's of interest to you.
On Nigerian News Direct, illegal oil lifting. Nekonde fight blackmailers. Use of tax revenue enhance tax morale compliance. You can read that on page 13. And the big story, 8th grid collapse. Manufacturers, business, energy user face hard times over nationwide blackout. And the writer for that story, unreliable power supply threat to industrialization. This is coming from NACCIMA. Discontinue national grid to end incessant collapse. This is coming from experts. As TCN comments partial restoration of power. You can read all of that on page 2.
Rachel, before you move further, did you take a look at the way then the figures are changing? On New Telegraph, we had it said 6 collapse. On Punch, we have 7. And on Nigerian News Direct, we're having 8 grid collapse. I just hope that the TCN will actually come out and really clarify so that we don't have these papers giving us different figures, whether it's the 6th or the 7th or the 8th. I won't be surprised another paper come now to give us a different figure. So I just hope that this will be clarified so at the end of the day, the public will not be, given the wrong information about what is the real number. How many times have Nigerian grid collapsed, whether it's the 6th, 7th, 8th, or is the 9th time. But importantly, we have to look into what can we do to avoid this grid collapse always. Because take a look at the places that have been affected. I mentioned some states, especially in the southeast, have been affected by this nationwide grid collapse. At the end of the day, if there is no power, definitely we are still looking at a fuel that is very, very scarce for people to actually, have. How much are you going to buy gas. How much is kerosene? I think about a month back, it was 800 naira per liter for a kerosene. So you can see the way things are moving. So I hope we really look into how we can have power, constant, power at the end of the day. If we can give other nations, I mean neighboring countries, why can't we be able to have our own, power 24 hours? So I hope that we'll look into that.
And even concerning this, I like what is coming from the NCCIMA. It's a fact that unreliable power supply is a threat to industrialization.
True.
The truth is that electricity is important. You can have big businesses or mega structures depending on diesel and petrol or kerosene. Or imagine if you own something as little as a bakery that you need electricity to bake, and you have to focus on buying gas or all of this. You find out that businesses are going to lose more than making profit. So it is a threat to industrialization, because the country or the power sector needs to prove to us that, we can have undisrupted power supply for industries to be able to function. Because imagine a mega industry depending on diesel. I don't think it's even going to be possible.
That was why earlier this year, the mid of this year, where we had some industries shutting down, even some TV stations, because they cannot afford how much diesel costs. We're having aviation still suffering as a result of how much they buy diesel. So just like you said, the government, the Minister of Power really need to come out and give us a very good reason why we keep it's like for every 2 months we have a national grid collapse. For every 2 months we have a national grid collapse. I mean, it's really sad. So we hope they look into that.
We hope so. And still on the Nigerian News Direct, there's a picture story of the National Nigeria Interreligious Council, and we keep hoping that something good comes out of this meeting, because all we want is a peaceful Nigeria. And on the downside of the paper, federal government handicapped over ASU strike, backs off on resumption order to reopen varsities. Nigeria's infrastructure development requires $35 billion annually to sustain growth. This is coming from the federal government. Sanwo-Olu SGF Sultan Khan president tasked Nigerians on peace and justice. World Maritime Day. Nigerian joins IMO on greener shipping for sustainable development. And that's all the news on Nigerian News Direct.
On First News, medical reports. US-based Nigerian lawyer vows to drag Tinubu Obi Atiku to court. National grid restored after partial collapse. This is coming from the Transmission Company of Nigeria. And male student protest separation from female mates in Bauchi. I think it was on the papers where we saw that the Commissioner of Education, the Bauchi government actually moved to separate the male student from the female student. They have their reasons for doing that. We're seeing that male students are protesting separation. So whatever the issue is, we hope that the Bauchi will be able to curtail whatever the issue is. And if it's for the good of the students, so that they can focus whatever their reasons are, this should be made clear, so that the students will not end up feeling as if something is wrong. And then at the end of the day, it can lead to something bigger than just separation of the genders. So we hope that they do something about that. Still on First News, we have Be Afraid of Obedient Movement. VON DG wants APC, says PDP is complicit. And on PDP crisis, Secondo's DS Wike accepts Atiku's appointment. Still on 2023, those marching for Peter Obi are hungry Nigerians, say Dino Milai. Still on that, we have Saraki, Ayim Shekara and others named by Atiku as special advisors. The big story, why Afenifere won't back Tinubu and Atiku. This is coming from Adebanjo in regard to the 2023 presidency. Says we can't continue to marginalize Igbo. Retaliates pan-Yoruba group support for Peter Obi. Court dismisses EFCC case against the ex-PDP spokesman Mantu. And we have good use of tax revenues will enhance tax morale and compliance. This is coming from the First Inland Revenue Service. Federal government makes U-turn, withdraws order to reopen varsities. Buhari didn't call for Keyamo's sack. This is coming from the presidency. And Nigerians concerned about hungry I'll be about hunger, not Muslim ticket. This is coming from Kenyamu. We're not just about we're hungry, or not just about the hunger in the land presently, but then we also have to look at if every religious, group is actually giving the right. What the Muslim have, the Christian also have a right to partake of it at the end of the day. So I hope we'll just not take, because Nigerians are actually hungry, and then we now take the hunger and rub it all over their face as a result of that, and then give them anything because we feel they will accept it because they are hungry. I mean, Nigerians have grown to the point that they can actually air their views on what they feel is not okay or what is going on in the country. The last story here, we have Paul Pogba confesses hiring a witch doctor, tells why. You can take a look at the first news and read any of the story that is of interest to you.
On the Point newspaper, the big story is on the 2023 polls. 5 reasons Obi may not be president. What Nigerians should expect as campaigns open. You can read more of that on pages 6 and 7. FBN Holdings, Zenith, 3 others fail CBN's LDR test as loan to economy hit 16.51 trillion naira. You can read more of that on page 22. Amosun disassociates sell from deal with Ogun PDP at Debo to Akinlade. You can read that on page 6. And on the downside of the paper, still on politics, PDP haunted by ghost of 2013, driven by today's reality. You can read that on page 16. And on the capital market, huge losses in BUA cement, total 3 others dampen all share index by 0.9%. Physically challenged persons agonize over rejection by employers would be in laws. Government agencies. You can read all of that on page 12. And still on the point, hubby develops stroke as pregnant wife is buried alive while digging at mining site. What a sad story, and if you want to read that, just get the Point newspaper and go to page 13, and that's all the news on the Point newspaper.
Yeah, just like you said, really sad one, and we hope the right authority will actually check on all this illegal mining that is going on. Not just our pregnant wife, but we've lost lots of youths as a result of this illegal mining. So we hope that they will look into that, and also on the fiscal challenge, I hope that they'll be given the opportunity too, because they are also citizens of Nigeria. They should be given the right to vote, they should be given the right for employment, they should be given the right to everything that every normal Nigerian deserves. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for doing this with me. Thank you so much to our viewers for always keeping a date with us, and thank you to all the crew members that made this program a success. Do have a blessed day ahead.